Good evening, everyone, and very warm welcome. Thank you all for coming to today's event. It is a real pleasure to have you with us tonight at the Vienna School of International Studies for our public panel discussion, Women's Leadership in Rethinking Security Beyond Fear, Force, and Deterrence. My name is Kseniia Pirnavskaia, and I'm with Open Nuclear Network, the Engagement and Network Coordinator. Open Nuclear Network is a program of Pax Sapiens, and at Pax we work to reduce the risk of predictable global catastrophes. ONN specifically focuses on nuclear conflict-related risks, working to reduce them through open source research, analytical foresight, and the engagement of impact-capable networks. It is a true honor to serve you as a moderator today for this evening conversation, a conversation that asks us not only what kind of security the world needs at these daunting times, but also who should be shaping it. This event is co-organized by Open Nuclear Network, the Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy, and the Vienna School of International Studies, and we are really grateful for your partnership within this event. We are living in a time of severe geopolitical tensions, ongoing wars, and a dangerous erosion of arms control and non-proliferation regimes. Long-standing assumptions about global stability and nuclear order are being shaken, while new technologies and shifting power dynamics are introducing fresh risks and uncertainties. In this environment, traditional security frameworks rooted in fear, force, and deterrence do not seem sufficient or enough. In many cases, they're also part of the very dynamics that actually sustain insecurity. To address today's complex and interconnected threats, we need leadership that is inclusive, forward-looking, and grounded in human security. Leadership that draws on a broad range of experiences and priorities, including those that have been long excluded from decision-making spaces. This includes women, certainly, but also people from diverse cultural, generational, professional, and regional backgrounds. Inclusive leadership means leadership that is representative, participatory, and responsive. And we know from both research and lived experiences that when diverse voices are meaningfully involved in disarmament, peace building, mediation, and security policy making, outcomes are more durable, more just, and more effective. At Open Nuclear Network, we are deeply committed to supporting this shift, both in how we analyze global security risks and how we foster dialogue and cooperation. That's why we are proud to co-organize this event and bring together voices that reflect the complexity of the world we navigate. In fact, this event was built around the visit of Margot Wallström, a former Minister of Foreign Affairs and Deputy Prime Minister of Sweden, a global leader who has long championed women's leadership and more broadly inclusive, gender-responsive and feminist approaches to peace, security and diplomacy. And we are deeply grateful to Margot for joining us here in Vienna and for engaging in this essential, timely and not always comfortable conversation, together with our distinguished panelists, but also with all of us. To officially open this evening, I'm pleased to invite our distinguished co-organizers to share a few words of welcome. So please join me in welcoming Michael Zinkanell, Director of the Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy, for his remarks.
Excellencies, dear ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, distinguished speakers, it is my great pleasure to welcome you tonight on behalf of the Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy to tonight's event, Women's Leadership in Rethinking Security Beyond Fear, Force, and Deterrence. The topic is certainly not a new one. I'm quite sure that most of you are aware of the landmark UN Resolution 1325 that is 25 years old this year. It has been adopted 25 years ago, and it has been focusing on the necessity of increased participation of women in conflict resolution and in peace processes, something that is, I would personally argue, more important today than even 25 years ago, given the more complex background of the geopolitical situation, the more devastating wars and conflicts that we see arising all around the globe, but especially also in Europe. And also the AIES, the Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy, has not developed such an event and such an initiative for the first time. Already in 2023, we have created and organized a similar event on the role of women in conflict zones, where we looked in particular at the lessons that we can draw from the conflict and the war in Ukraine. And I looked at the report that we published back then and took one central element out of this report, which I believe is crucial also for tonight, and that is also the necessity to develop more comprehensive security and defense policies and strategies around the world in order to involve diversity, equality, and inclusion in military and in non-military settings. So back then already we tried to make a concrete contribution to the topic with this one central element that I wanted to point out as a recommendation to have more diversity, more inclusion, and more diversity, inclusion, and equality in these fields. And without any further ado, I'd like to thank the panel. We will certainly have an excellent discussion tonight. We started off already this morning, which was an inspiring conversation already. I'd like to thank my colleagues from the Open Nuclear Network, and in particular also my team at the AIS, to enable this conference tonight. Without them, it wouldn't have been possible that we are meeting here. And thanks to all of you for joining this very relevant and timely conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. And next, I'm also delighted to welcome Giulia Pelillo, Head of the Research Area for Cultural Studies here at the Vienna School of International Studies. The floor is yours.
Good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the Directorate of the Vienna School of International Studies. I am the head of a new research area here at the Vienna School of International Studies, which focuses on culture. And also as a professor of cultural studies, I have to say that I am particularly delighted to have this panel here this evening, because the issue of the women's leadership in rethinking security is also a cultural one. And culture doesn't mean indoctrination. It's not about telling people that a good leader isn't the alpha male who makes top-down decisions without consulting those affected by these decisions, or the leader who reacts to crisis with aggression, with war, with violence. Now, despite having been unsuccessful in the past and being still unsuccessful, this model is back in vogue. So why isn't it a contradiction? And surely there are no easy answers to these questions. But what does it mean, cultural work, in this context? Well, it means expanding the range of tools, of cultural resources to imagine and to manage power beyond the pyramidal model of violent imposition. It requires telling better stories and better narratives about successful leaders. It requires better images and visualizations of power, and it requires stronger alliances between women and men engaged in this kind of work. So many such tools already exist and need to be made more visible. Others need to be developed and disseminated. So in this spirit, I look very much forward to this wonderful panel, and thank you for being here. I thank the panelists, the organizers, and all of you for being here tonight. And yeah, I'm very pleased to be part of this. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Giulia, and also thank you for drawing those intersectional issues, with the cultural studies. I think it's very important, and this is also, something we're going to talk about today. And for the next opening remarks, I would like to invite Loïc Simonet, the research fellow at the Austrian Institute for International Affairs. This is the organization with whom we organized the morning roundtable in the morning on the same topic. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Kseniia, and good evening to all of you. Talking about women's leadership and inclusive security approaches in these days is not, I believe, an easy task. We thought that after the two world wars, peace had become the natural state of Europe and war an exception, but we were wrong. Far from Hemingway's Farewell to Arms, our era is witnessing a resurgence of state brutality, if not violence. We see hyper-masculine, hubristic performance as the new modern, and I'm thinking about Donald Trump's brutality towards Ukrainian President Zelensky in the Oval Office and Vice President Vance's condescension towards Europeans at the Munich Security Conference. So just as we commemorate the 18th anniversary of the 80th anniversary of the Yalta Conference, the bulldozer diplomacy is back. I want it, I try to take it, be it the Greenland or the Panama Canal. And we see red lines, being crossed everywhere in the world. I was reading something from the ICRC president, Mirjana Spolaik, repeatedly pointing out the erosion of the respect of the Geneva Conventions, and the Gaza conflict is a good example of that. Nuclear weapons are on the political agenda again, calling into question long-standing global norms against the use and testing of these weapons. And arms control and disarmament are losing tracks amidst current focus on deterrence, and it's part of the title of this the event today. And we see that tensions have recently heightened between the nuclear-armed states India and Pakistan. So all in all, global security challenges and women's approach to security seem, at first glance, fundamentally at odds. From a feminist perspective, the reliance on nuclear weapons, for instance, not only perpetuates global power imbalances, but also reinforces a model of security built on fear, dominance, and exclusion. So how can we apply women's perspectives to our perceptions of security and propose alternative pathways? Is human security the panacea? Do we simply have to promote the human-centered approach to disarmament, highlighted by UN Secretary General Guterres in his new agenda for peace? But nuclear weapons and nuclear diplomacy seem to be far from human security. Framing global warming, for example, as a human security issue is easy, but doing the same with nuclear weapons is more difficult. Should we establish rather meaningful connections with the UN Women, Peace and Security agenda? But we know that the implementation of the WPS agenda often fell short. Whatever the solution, and our guest speakers will have a lot to suggest today, what is certain is that our world is a mess right now. What is also certain, in my opinion, is that women's approach and leadership offer a critical opportunity to reframe security discourse by promoting a more inclusive, cooperative, and human-centered approach to international security, leading to transformative change. So beyond fear, force, and deterrence, we need women's leadership to face the unprecedented challenges of our time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Loïc, for setting the stage for today's conversation in such a passionate manner. And now I would like to turn to our keynote opening address. And it is my great pleasure to welcome Ambassador Alexander Kmentt, Director of the Disarmament, Arms Control and Non-Proliferation Department at the Austrian MFA. The floor is yours, Alexander.
Thank you so much. Good evening to all. It's a great pleasure for me to be here at this event tonight talking about such an important topic. And of course, it's a great honor to be at the same meeting with such a distinguished panel, among them, of course, former Foreign Minister from Sweden, Margot Wallström. I've been asked to make a few comments on security approaches. And of course, I've only been given a few minutes, so I'll try my best to raise a few points. In Europe, of course, the focus is very much on security and defense as a result of Russia's illegal aggression against Ukraine. We see the war returning to European soil. And the peace dividend that we felt we have in Europe, we have enjoyed in Europe, seems to be over, with a very significant focus on increasing defense capabilities, increasing military spending. And certainly this is necessary in light of clearly aggressive actors such as Russia. And Austria also supports this, which is clearly expressed in the government program, and also the increase in defense budget in Austria. But it is also important not to lose sight of the broader perspective on security, as was also pointed out before. So we witness an emphasis also on nuclear weapons and nuclear deterrence, which for us in Austria is problematic and disconcerting development. And my colleague George-Wilhelm Gallhofer will speak more on this in detail in the panel discussion. But if we talk about approaches to security, it's clear, at least to me, that military solutions alone will not be sufficient, and in most cases will actually not be the appropriate approach at all to address the security concerns that we face. If we look at security concerns in Europe, there is of course Russia, but there are also conflicts and instability in the south, in the east of Europe, including in the Western Balkans. There is terrorism, there is radicalism, there is Islamic radicalism, there is increase of right-wing radical forces, there is influence on democratic processes, there are hybrid threats also from other actors than Russia. Furthermore, there are general insecurity drivers like poverty, instability, climate change, environmental degradation, corruption, loss of democratic space, loss of human rights. And of course, on top of all of this, there is a weakening of respect for international law and multilateralism in general. So it's clear that, yes, we have a military threat, but we have security challenges that go way beyond that. And security needs to be looked at in an integrated way, looking at a military perspective and non-military perspective together to devise an appropriate mix of how to deal with these security concerns. Human security was mentioned. It's probably not a panacea, but it is essential. We're talking about, of course, freedom from fear and freedom of want. It's not an alternative security paradigm, but it's a complete one. It's a more complete one than a military perspective of security. And it may not be so much in the foreground at the moment, but it needs to be at the center of our discussions just as much as increasing our defense capabilities. So human security is not a soft approach, and it's not something that only applies in peacetime, and it's not contingent to security considerations. It's the very foundation of a security approach and of achieving real security. It underpins, human security underpins the women, peace and security agenda. It is crucially important for the security and climate change nexus. It is crucially important for the security and development nexus. And it's also important for the whole field of disarmament, arms control and non-proliferation. And Austria has put a lot of emphasis on this. With a so-called humanitarian disarmament approach, which looks at weapon systems from the perspective of the effects these weapons have and juxtaposes these effects with the military utility of these weapons. So the effects on civilian populations in the immediate and in the long term. So we followed this approach on the issue of landmines, on the issue of cluster munitions, on small arms and light weapons, on the Arms Trade Treaty, and also on nuclear weapons. So I think the human security paradigm can very well be applied to the nuclear weapons issue as well, by focusing on the risks, by focusing on the consequences of what happens if something goes wrong, rather than the perpetual assumptions that we see that nothing will ever go wrong with nuclear deterrence, which I think is a very dangerous approach to security. So we argue for a paradigm shift away from a perspective on security that is underpinned by the permanent threat of global mass destruction. And one key element of the security approach is, of course, inclusion. And that includes, of course, the gender balance and the participation of women as absolutely crucial, but it also includes the participation of broader stakeholders, affected communities, of youth, of civil society organizations, of academia, and generally opening up discussions to a broader set of stakeholders. So the whole disarmament arms control field is probably the most gendered discourse that we find. And the treaties that Austria has been working on, and I mentioned the subjects before, have really been trailblazers on trying to move move a human security perspective and move an inclusive and feminist perspective on this issue. They are really an avant-garde on how multilateral cooperation should be conducted on these issues. So we see a significant pushback at the moment. We also see certainly the risk of progress being lost due to negative geopolitical development. But I believe Europe in particular has a role to play to defend the gains that we have seen in the last decades, and to focus, in addition to the security and defense focus, to demonstrate that this must not come at the expense of a human security approach and of progressive standards. We tried to do in Europe to develop a security from such a broad perspective that is based on international law, that is based on values, and focuses on diplomacy and on positive engagement. And it's important that we do not lose this in the current development that, of course, is focused for very obvious reasons on increasing the security and defense capabilities. So it's crucial, in my view, in the current debate on security in Europe, but also globally. And to conclude, just to say that at the time when international law and the entire principle of multilateralism and cooperation is challenged predominantly by some few powerful actors, it is very important to come together with those like-minded stakeholders for whom international law and multilateralism are key pillars of security. And such a cooperative approach that's focused on a broad perspective on security, on a human-centered approach, on an inclusive approach, is also something that Austria would like to contribute to the UN Security Council if our candidature for the non-permanent seat in 27-28 is successful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Kmentt, very much on time, and thank you also for mentioning a lot on human security and the broadening of the security paradigm and the concept itself. I think this is also something we're going to touch today in the discussion. So now I think it is the time to turn to our panelists, and let me first introduce our panelists, and please bear with me, we have very distinguished panelists here, so I will read out for you to also learn more about our panelists today before we get to the discussion point. So, Margot Wallström, thank you for being here. Ms. Margot Wallström has a long political career. At 25 years of age, she became a member of the Swedish Parliament and served as such for 6 years. She was also appointed a government minister for the first time in 1988, and she has since held different portfolios like social affairs, culture, before becoming the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Sweden from 2014 to 2019. She also worked for the EU for 10 years as Environment Commissioner and Vice President of the EU Commission. She was the first UN Special Representative on conflict-related sexual violence, and Ms. Wallström also chaired the board of Lund University, Sweden, and she has received several honorary doctorate degrees. Rebecca Jovin has been working in the UN ODA since 2019, initially as Special Assistant to the High Representative for Disarmament Affairs in New York, and since February 2022, a Chief of the UN ODA Vienna office. Prior to her appointment to UN ODA, Ms. Jovin served as Chief of Strategic Planning and Operation Support in the United Nations Mine Action Service. She has also worked in different coordination, policy development, and programmatic roles in the UN system before. Christine Muttonen She is the Vice President of the Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy and a co-president of a Parliamentarians for Nuclear Non-Proliferation and Disarmament, and also very recently Open Nuclear Network Advisory Council member. Thank you for that. She has been serving, so she served, was elected to the Austrian Parliament and served there for 18 years, first as a spokesperson for arts and culture, and later as a spokesperson for EU and foreign affairs for the Social Democrats. She also served as a member of the Council of Europe and the Parliamentary Assembly of the OSCE, and in 2014 she was elected Vice President of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly and appointed as a special representative for Central and Eastern Asia. She was also elected to become the second woman to serve as president of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly. And last but not least, George-Wilhelm Gallhofer. He is the Deputy Director for Disarmament, Non-Proliferation and Export Control at the Austrian Foreign Ministry and has just been appointed as new director from later this year. Congratulations, I think. This is appropriate to applaud.
Thank you.
He has worked in the department since March 2019, and he also serves as the Executive Secretary at the Hague Code of Conduct Against Ballistic Missile Proliferation. He was deputy to the president of the first meeting of state parties to the TPNW and was a member of Austria's delegation to the negotiation conference for the treaty and worked on the humanitarian impacts initiative that led to adopt the treaty itself. He previously served at the Austrian missions to the United Nations in New York, the European Union in Brussels, and the Council of Europe in Strasbourg. So these are our distinguished panelists, and as I said, thank you for bearing with me to reading this out, but I think it's also very important for our audience to understand with whom we are speaking today. So without further ado, I would like to get into the discussion, and I hope that it's going to be somewhat conversational. I'll ask you questions, but then also we'll have an opportunity for audience to ask your questions to the speakers at the end. So please, if you have something, write it down or remember, because you will have an opportunity to ask your question. So in the first segment of our conversation, I really want to focus on the reflections from your fields of work, from your perspectives, you know, how the things are. So the first, I would like to ask Margot. So looking at today's global security challenges that, you know, our speakers outlined in the opening remarks as well, where do you see the main limitations of current approaches to security, and what opportunities should we potentially be focusing instead? And from your experience, how can inclusive leadership help shape more sustainable and human-centered policies? And as someone who has long championed women's leadership, how do you see its impact evolving, and what barriers still need to be addressed?
Thank you very much, and thank you to all of you for spending a very nice summer evening here with us, and under such a daunting theme. I tried to tell that to Kseniia, and I tried to make her make it shorter, but she didn't agree to that, and in the end she was right. We have to think about women's leadership in rethinking security, and we have to move beyond fear, force and deterrence. As you've already heard, I think that all the previous speakers, they took everything. So I don't know if they've left anything. And also thank you for inviting me to this as we say in the north of Sweden, unnecessarily beautiful city, Vienna, and it's an honor and pleasure. I believe that, first of all, I'm a former everything, as you could hear, but at my age, the new title that I have is grandmother. And I decided that I would make that my new mission, and that is to bring children into the picture, because I think it makes us think more long-term. It makes us think like wider and not so narrow about militarization coming first, but actually think also about political solutions and diplomacy and the role of diplomacy in the future. It makes us think more inclusive about inclusion, as you've heard already as an argument. It makes us think about culture, because to children it's important with culture and how forceful that can be. And I've seen it myself also in working for Ukraine for a while, that culture is a given part of everything. That's what makes it worth it, to even fight the war, that they can use their own culture, speak their own language, and do all of those things. I have said this morning that there are sort of 5 points that I believe are absolutely necessary now. I think we need to change the security paradigms, how we think about security. We have to, it's inadequate today. And imagine also what is now going on, because to the grandchildren you have to tell them that the world is both a rather dangerous and terrible place, but it's also the most beautiful place. And you have to give them the arguments why this is true. And of course, when we see democracy being undermined in the way that is happening now, it is sort of left to, there is a new word that we have had to learn, and that is when we move from meritocracy, we go to kakistocracy. How do you say it in English? Kakistocracy. And you know what that is? That is giving the power to the least fit people to exercise, leadership and steer the world. The least knowledgeable or least trained to do that, to exercise leadership. So we have to change the traditional security paradigms, because it hasn't worked. Can we say that fear, force, and deterrence has helped us a lot over history? No. And this is the first thing. Discuss what do we really mean with modern security arrangements, and how do we? And I think we have to realize why women's leadership is a unique asset. And we had a very interesting discussion this morning. So somebody said that, well, maybe at the very local level, local conflicts, women can be engaged, they understand that, but when it comes to nuclear weapons, maybe they are not the best ones to deal with those issues. If I exaggerate a bit, but I have heard this argument before. So you have to understand that this is about making sure that we use the potential of half of the population on this planet at the moment, and still look around 25 years after this resolution that was, of course, groundbreaking. It's the mother resolution of making sure that we understand the different roles that men and women have in both war and peace. But looking at the results, it's like comparing failures, because still it's not a given that women appear around the tables where negotiations are being made. Do you see them anywhere in those discussions about what is going on now, from Gaza to Ukraine to Sudan or other places? Women are not there, and they are the ones also affected, of course, by everything that happens. So the unique value of women's leadership. And as I said, and it links to my first point, the broader definition of security, making sure that we understand also the crisis, the environmental and climate crisis, and how that can exacerbate and be a driver of conflict and even wars. And this is becoming more and more evident. I think we see a lot of proof of that already. I think also to understand the power, you have already said that, those excellent speakers before me said that the power of inclusion, to be deliberately inclusive. And you have to plan it carefully to say that how do we make the most out of the power that people carry, the knowledge that different groups of people carry. And this is also about democracy, how democracy is meant to function, that you include more people. And then I think we have to move from reaction to prevention. And that means, as you've heard, to move from the short-term thinking to long-term, from narrow to wide thinking, from the one-sided ideas to plural ideas, from exclusive to inclusive. That was a very long answer.
But
almost
it was
as long as your title for our Kseniia.
Well, then we're quid pro quo.
So those are the things. Yeah. So those are the things that I think we need to discuss. And remember, we have to come together now. We have to be very courageous, because these times are dangerous for us, and especially when democracy. Because how do we define democracy if not the right to speak up? To say what we think, to feel that we have access to justice, that we can not only go and vote every 4th year, but actually live in a society where we feel that this is for us and is for everyone in a society, and that we feel free and liberated. And this is under threat at the moment.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And it's okay to have long answers as well, because these are very difficult questions, and I think, there is no simple answer to them.
I'm joking also with you.
Yeah, I know. I'm returning the joke. But next, I really would like to ask Christine, since you sit right next to me, I wanted to ask also, based on your experience, I mentioned that you have a lot of parliamentarian experience based in, in Austrian parliament, but also OSCE Parliamentary Assembly. From this point of view, how can parliamentarians help shape more forward-looking and inclusive approaches that we just all talked about? And in your view, how has women's leadership in parliamentary diplomacy maybe contributed to advancing disarmament goals or the better security outcomes, and what further steps are needed to ensure that these contributions are long-lasting and integrated?
Also long questions. There are only long questions today. Thank you. Well, I think parliamentarians, of course, are very important, because they can do quite a lot. They can actively promote strategies and policies aimed at reducing weapons, the various types of weapons. We already heard from Ambassador Kmentt talking about the landmines, but also, of course, we can do something, and parliamentarians can do something against nuclear weapons by advocating and supporting for international treaties. This is very important, because this is their work, their legislative work to do so. They can use the parliaments as a platform, for example, the national parliaments as a platform for discussion, for making an awareness about the dangers of weapons, of nuclear threats, etc., but also the international ones. And I think parliamentarian diplomacy can play a very crucial role in negotiating arms control, for example, because the parliamentary diplomacy can complete what diplomacy, the traditional diplomacy, can do, because they can work on a different level. They can work on a lower level and more informal level, and that's why it's very important, because they can build trust and they can create informal channels, and those informal channels can be very important when it comes to negotiations. So when you already have a channel, you don't have to build up new ones. And they might help. When you look at the international organizations, so the Parliamentary Assembly of the OSCE and so the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe with its 56 parliaments, so quite a lot. But also organizations like the IPU, the Interparliamentarian Union, with its 181 parliaments, so they can do a lot. They are predestined for such being such platforms. The parliamentarians also can connect and join forces with international and regional NGOs. We just heard that we should connect. We have to connect much more with all the different groups. They are heading into the same direction. So, for example, PNND, the Parliamentarians for Nuclear Non-Proliferation and Disarmament, is a network of over 700 parliamentarians worldwide. And they organized countless side events at the parliamentary assembly meetings of the IPU or the OSCE, and to inform and also to kind of educate parliamentarians, because this is very important to give the information to the parliamentarians, because not all of them are into this topic very much. So you have to deliver information, and I think this is very, very important. So the PNND and IPU even produced a handbook called Supporting Nuclear Non-Proliferation and Disarmament for parliamentarians to see how they could deal with this issue. And I also want to mention if you want a success story of CTBT, so the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, I think by now 187 states have signed the treaty and 178 ratified it. This would not have been possible without the good cooperation between CTBTO, so the organization behind CTBT, and the parliamentarians, because parliamentarians have to agree on those treaties in the parliaments. And in the conference, in the Vienna conference on the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons in 2014, there was this big conference in Austria, and invited were mainly diplomats and people from the legal side, but not parliamentarians. So we worked together with Alexander Kmentt. I mean, he worked with us because he was the real expert. We're very glad to have him. And we asked him, how can we support you? And we organized a side event in the Austrian parliament, and we had parliamentarians come, because this was the only possibility for parliamentarians to come to a parliamentarian conference. So they came from everywhere, from the Marshall Islands to Kazakhstan and to Canada, and from everywhere. So we got these connects working together, and we brought in motions in the Austrian parliament which were signed by all the parties, even the right-wing ones. So the point was that we wanted to have a motion and a resolution that is signed by the whole parliament. So this could also be a proof for other parliaments to see what is possible. So in that case, we were very glad to work together. And of course, when you talk about women's leadership in parliamentary diplomacy, we just heard women bring in unique and a more holistic picture of the threats of the question of security. What is security? And I want to give you a small example. It's on terrorism. There was the big wish when I was president of the Parliamentary Assembly to have an ad hoc committee on terrorism. So I wasn't so sure first, but then we talked about that, and we found out that women wanted to bring in very different aspects, like when men, or most of the men, not all of them, of course, wanted to have more weapons, wanted to have more prisons, wanted to have more punishment. So the women started to say, but what about the education? Why are they doing this? Why do they become, as they are, terrorists? What about the education? What about jobs? What about their life? How they are going to lead their life? So the human aspect was very, very important. And so we tried to bring in the different sides from women, from left and right and men into this, into this ad hoc committee. So in that sense, it made sense again. And I think these are possibilities where parliamentarians can do a lot. And women can do a lot because, again, they bring in a new perspective. So still, there are a lot of things to do. We just heard 25 years of the UN Resolution 3025. So, well, more women are needed. More women are needed in parliaments. More women are needed on all levels, on the local level as well as the national level and the international level. And we have to have them not just one here and there, even if it's a leading position. We have to find ways to have women throughout the whole process on all levels, so that they really can kind of work together as well.
Thank you, Christine, so much. And I think it's also very interesting to see, you know, the perspective from the parliamentarian world as well, because I think when they organize such events, you know, we talk about expert community, diplomatic community, UN, and I think not so much about, you know, what's happening in the world of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly or the parliaments generally.
And just one sentence: the parliamentarians are the link to the civil society, and I think this is so important because they go home, they have their constituencies, and there they can kind of find of ways to talk about that and to explain the threats of armament, of nuclear armament, but also to bring in, to take back the wishes and fears of civil society.
Yes, this is, especially since parliamentarians have access to public, and this is also what a lot of our community, I think, lacks, the access to the public audience, to the wider audiences who are not that much, you know, always interested in, you know, what we're doing. So I guess the parliamentarian diplomacy or the connection, this is something to explore for all of us, I guess, in our job. So thank you for sharing that. And now I would like to revert back to the UN world. Rebecca, so given your position in the UN and your background, how do you assess those security gaps, and how do you think inclusive leadership can help close those gaps? And maybe you can also talk about, you know, an ODA work and what you do specifically to elevate the diversity.
Great. No, thank you, Kseniia, and thank you to all the organizers. It's great to be here. Really looking forward to this. And, you know, it's been mentioned by many speakers already. This is an important anniversary year, 25 years of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda in Beijing, plus 30. And yet, I mean, it's somewhat shocking that we're finding ourselves in this, you know, what many have called kind of a post-feminist world, post-multilateralism, I'm not sure, you know, post a lot of things. And that in and of itself is, you know, a real challenge, and it speaks to the, you know, the issues and the gaps in security strategies, in particular when it comes to nuclear weapons and nuclear risks. So maybe I'll start with the gap side, Kseniia, and then talk a little bit about UN and UN ODA more generally, and our work on gender equality and more broadly inclusion and diversity. But on the gap side, I mean, much has already been said. If we look at security strategies, if we look at nuclear risks in particular, I mean, without a doubt, we're in a very grim period of history. We are, you know, arguably at a point in time where we're facing the highest nuclear risks that we've seen since the Cold War, right? And much has already been said. Alexander mentioned it as well. We have nuclear weapons regaining traction and salience in national security doctrines. We have a qualitative modernization happening, and also quantitative in some cases. We are also really seeing the use of nuclear rhetoric and threats being, you know, thrown around relatively liberally, and also whispers of nuclear testing. So, you know, the environment is not a good one when we look at it that way. So I would say, you know, we have kind of gaps on three levels. On the one hand, those norms being really eroded, and on the other hand, you know, also the institutions themselves being challenged. And I would throw technology also in there as an important additional area that is creating perhaps new pressures and new gaps. So on the institutional side, again, it's been alluded to, but maybe just to elaborate a little bit. I mean, first of all, real challenges to multilateralism and the international system and rule-based international order writ large. But looking more specifically, again, at disarmament and nuclear weapons in particular, you have this, complex web of instruments that has been built up over time that has been really key to the, to the realities of security that we've known for much of recent history. And at the core of that, you have the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and you are seeing real strains and pressures and erosion, really, of those core institutions and instruments. So NPT, you've had multiple review cycles without an agreed outcome. You have really a reflection, I think, of the geopolitical tensions that have been mentioned by others, really making its way into and reflecting in those negotiations and processes. And you have other treaties, CTBT was just mentioned, a treaty that is not in force yet, where you also in recent history have seen a nuclear weapon state de-ratify that treaty. Not a good trend either, I would argue. And then, you have the TPNW, which I hope we can speak a little bit more about, especially when it comes to gender dimensions. It's a new treaty, but, of course, far from a universal instrument yet. And then, this is the multilateral side. On the bilateral side, I would argue there's also real institutional pressures if you think about the fact that the New START treaty will be expiring next year, 2026, and some signals of willingness for strategic stability talks, U.S.-Russia, U.S.-China, but really not concrete movement on any of those, right? So in institutional environment where there are definitely strains and gaps, and then the third dimension that I alluded to is for me the kind of technology dimension in all of this, where you see technological advances really blurring the line between conventional and nuclear threats, really changing the nature of armed conflicts and violence and security, and connected to that really kind of this broader issue of interconnected risks and threats, and we don't have the governance structures in place to really address those issues, and the pace of technological development is far kind of outpacing the ability of multilateral processes and negotiations to really keep up with that. So I think these are some real challenges, and of course, what are the solutions to filling those gaps? I mean, political will is obviously a key part of that, policy and technical solutions, but I would say also, the approach to leadership and how we go about decision making and engagement on those challenging issues, I think is also part of the picture. So let me pivot from that maybe to the second part of your question, and that was more about UN leadership and diversity and inclusion, and what are we doing in the UN Office for Disarmament Affairs. I mean, obviously this is a key key agenda for us. We as the UN Office for Disarmament Affairs very much guided also by the Secretary General's gender parity strategy, but also other institutional strategies on diversity and inclusion, whether it's disability inclusion or otherwise. And my boss, the High Representative for Disarmament Affairs, and me myself, we are both international gender champions, so personal commitment to really upholding and furthering gender equality within the institution. And within UNODA, we have been able to achieve gender parity at all international professional levels, which certainly wasn't the case some years ago. There's obviously other dimensions, cultural shift and other things that go along with that. It's not just about the numbers, but it is, an important metric and certainly not a step that should be discounted. So internally, quite a bit that we've done and continue to do. We have had for a long time a gender policy for the office. And I really want to stress kind of two aspects of that, because one has come up quite a bit, and the second one perhaps not quite as much. So one pillar of that, I would say, is of course advancing equal participation and leadership of women in international disarmament and arms control processes. The numbers show very much that we still have a problem. I'll come back to that in a moment. So this is indeed still, unfortunately, an issue. But the other is the gendered impact of weapons. So nuclear weapons, but all different kinds of weapons, and also connected to that, articulation of what needs to be done to mainstream gender issues in relevant frameworks and programs. And that's really key to get to that more, I think, better, more sustainable alternative, security paradigms from the fear, force, and deterrence that you've given us as kind of a paradigm. So on the participation side, as I said, numbers are not great. They're better than they were some decades ago. So of course, it's important also, I think, to acknowledge progress. But when we look, for example, on average at how many women delegates are part of intergovernmental processes dealing with disarmament, arms control, and non-proliferation, it's about a third, okay, on average. It varies across mechanisms. The nuclear field tends to be not so great, although TPNW is an exception. But roughly, a third across those different mechanisms. And then if you look at heads of delegations, who's speaking, it's even lower, right? So then we're talking more about a quarter. So clearly there, as others have said, there are still, gaps. I think, Margot, it was you who said the women are still not at the table, right? So that is a reality. And this is where we as an office, we collect that data, we analyze it, we do make it public. We would like to do that a bit more real time. It's something we're working on to really put that information and those statistics out there in more real time. But where we do have, and of course we also encourage at the political level delegations to bring, to have diverse representation in their delegations in the widest sense of the word. Including youth, including affected communities, et cetera, not just women. But I would say in the areas where we do have a bit more leverage also as the secretariats, for example, when it comes to establishing groups of governmental experts that have been mandated by member states, it's the discretion of the Secretary General to decide on the composition of those groups based on nominations from member states. And here, our High Representative has been very principled since she took office, saying, I will only put forward gender-balanced, groups of governmental experts. And we've seen immediate results. So these women exist. They're out there. They can be nominated. And similarly, we've seen greater diversity in terms of participants in groups of governmental experts with people with disabilities and so forth. So, with some relatively low-hanging fruit and principles, you can have an impact. So I would say, that's also where we try to use our leverage as a secretariat. And then growing networks of women and diverse leaders, I think, is key. And I do want to give a shout out to our Austrian colleagues. Austria is obviously a strong supporter of gender equality generally, but has been actively supporting over the past several years a women's ammunition experts training. The third iteration of that training will be taking place in Vienna in just a couple of weeks. And this is absolutely key. So in technical areas, different technical areas, but also more generally to really empower women, to strengthen those networks, and to build capacity, I think is key. I'll stop very soon. Let me just say one word about because that was participation on the more gendered impact and the frameworks, because I think there, it is a reality that there are very few international frameworks, disarmament and non-proliferation and arms control frameworks that have a gender component or a pronounced gender component. The TPNW is an exception. The Arms Trade Treaty is an exception. These are important exceptions and ones where we as ODA, of course, want to also highlight the good practice that comes out of those kinds of frameworks, and obviously are very much engaged in supporting the implementation of those frameworks and the efforts. So, for example, in the context of the TPNW, there's an appointed gender focal point. That focal point is Malta, now taking over from Mexico after the last couple of years and working, actively with taking that forward. The other area, that we look at closely is the UN General Assembly's first committee. For those who don't know, this is the committee that deals with peace and security and disarmament issues. Every year it meets for a month. It considers between 60 and 70 resolutions. And there we have seen an increase in the proportion or the share of resolutions that does have some form of gender language in it, whether it's dealing with participation or gendered impact. So that's a positive. And last year was actually the highest proportion we've ever seen, 36% of those resolutions. But there is a lot of pushback, and there is also a sense that that could be plateauing, right? So we have these frameworks. We have to really also work as ODA and, of course, with member states to ensure that those frameworks are expanded, those instruments are strengthened, and that the elements that are dealing also with inclusivity and diversity are really taken forward seriously. So I'll stop there. I hope we can come back to other things.
Yes, thank you, Rebecca. Thank you for that. And I think it's a very important point about inclusivity being deliberate and intentional, because I guess that's the key recipe to making the inclusive leadership really happening, not only on paper but in practice. So thank you very much for these points. And now I'd like to turn to George-Wilhelm. Since Austria has been, as also Rebecca correctly mentioned already, a consistent proponent of disarmament and human-centered approaches, how is the current security environment prompting a need for new thinking from your perspective? And also maybe you can share Austria's experience in integrating inclusivity into your diplomacy and security thinking as well. Maybe it will give other states some ideas how to do it better. So please teach us a lesson in that regard.
Thank you. Thank you, first of all, for inviting me. It's really an honor to be on this fantastic panel with fantastic speakers. And of course, I won't be able to resist your call to speak more about TPNW, which I think I can do in my sleep these days. And thanks for the good questions. Much has been said already about the sort of acute moment of insecurity that we face. And as Alexander already alluded to, some people argue that the answer to that is more nuclear weapons, which we fundamentally disagree with, because we think nobody ends up safer with more weapons or with more nuclear weapons in more hands. And because what are weapons of mass destruction, especially nuclear weapons? They are pretty much exactly the opposite of inclusive security. And so against this backdrop, a renewed push for nuclear disarmament and humanitarian security is now more urgent than ever. And central to that is a move away from the reliance of nuclear weapons more broadly. Austria's approach here is clear. Only clear legal prohibition of nuclear weapons and nuclear deterrence can halt proliferation of these weapons and eliminate the inherent risks that they pose of catastrophic humanitarian consequences. And as one of the key initiators and active state party of the TPNW, we've consistently championed this kind of shift away from a highly precarious and problematic nuclear deterrence doctrine towards a security paradigm grounded in scientific facts, international law, multilateralism, and the avoidance of humanitarian harm. And the TPNW here is not merely symbolic. It's a concrete, urgently needed reinforcement of the global disarmament and non-proliferation regime, complementing and supporting the NPT at a time when practically all vectors on nuclear weapons point in the wrong direction. And the TPNW provides an excellent case study of how integrating diversity not only gives voice to those formerly underrepresented, but also channels into effective international norm setting this important element. Let me briefly highlight three elements that make the TPNW unique in this regard, and some have already been alluded to. First of all, the TPNW explicitly centers the experience and perspectives of survivors of nuclear use and testing, those who've borne the catastrophic consequences firsthand. Their experiences were key for the novel provisions in the treaty on victim assistance and environmental remediation unique to the TPNW, and these groups are systematically integrated into the TPNW process. Secondly, the TPNW incorporates leading scientific expertise through its scientific advisory group, ensuring that policy is informed by rigorous, independent evidence on health, environmental, and security impacts. And third, the treaty ensures meaningful engagement with civil society, with unprecedented access and participation, including women, indigenous peoples, LGBTQ+ communities, and other underrepresented groups, recognizing that inclusive participation enriches the discourse and strengthens legitimacy. This goes beyond all other treaties in the WMD area, and originated from the close cooperation that we started as Austria and with our core allies, with civil society from the humanitarian initiative that was already referred to, through the negotiations and into the treaty text itself, as well as its implementation, rules of procedure, and the work building on it. The TPNW, for example, as you mentioned, Rebecca, has an institutional agenda focal point to continue to champion this aspect. This holistic and intersectional approach not only challenges the traditional exclusionary nuclear policy-making paradigm, but it also advances a human-centered vision of security that is more just, equitable, and sustainable. As coordinator of the TPNW's consultative process on security concerns, we led efforts to articulate TPNW states' legitimate security perspectives based on scientific evidence that highlighted the flaws inherent in the precarious nuclear deterrence paradigm. The report that we presented to the third meeting of states parties last March offers comprehensive recommendations to advance this agenda, demonstrating that fact-based, human-centered, inclusive security is not only possible but necessary. And it also demonstrates effectively that such an approach to international security is a legitimate demand, since the consequences of nuclear weapons know no borders and will affect all of us, should the highly volatile and precarious security logic of nuclear deterrence fail. I very much recommend the report as an important counterpoint to highlight the legitimate security concerns of those that are not relying on nuclear weapons for the security. Alexander already alluded earlier to Austria's commitments extending further than just nuclear weapons, of course. Our humanitarian disarmament work goes across anti-personnel mines, protecting civilians from explosive weapons in populated areas, the regulation of lethal autonomous weapon systems, and all of this is driven by the same fundamental principle. Security must serve people, not abstract notions of international security. And we've taken on a leading role in multilateral forums, advocating for the universalization and the robust implementation of humanitarian disarmament instruments and IHL. By emphasizing the scientific evidence and the humanitarian consequences of these weapons, Austria is working with broad cross-regional coalitions of states and large diverse civil society to build a common factual basis for international negotiations to shift the global discourse away from abstract theories of nuclear deterrence towards international humanitarian and human rights law and prevention. So what lessons can we draw for sustainable, inclusive security? I would offer that our experience offers about 3 lessons. The first is to center humanitarian concerns. The catastrophic humanitarian consequences of nuclear and other indiscriminate weapons must be at the heart of security policy and approaches to international security, which leads directly to the point on prevention must be central, not reaction, as you rightly pointed out. Mm-hmm. The second takeaway for us is to continue to champion multilateralism and law. Only through international cooperation and legal instruments, new and existing, such as IHL, can we actually start to address today's complex security threats. And third is to integrate inclusivity. Meaningful participation of women, affected communities, and other previously marginalized groups strengthens both the legitimacy and the effectiveness of disarmament efforts. So to conclude, Austria's experience demonstrates that even smaller countries can play a forceful role in international security by mobilizing broad coalitions, drawing on science, affected communities, and illustrating the humanitarian effects of weapons and policies. Sustainable security can only be achieved by multilateral, inclusive, evidence-based action and regulation. That may not be an easy feat these days, but every crisis offers an opportunity to make changes. And they also highlight the dangers that we may have forgotten about, nuclear weapons being a very good example of that. So hopefully we can strengthen what we've built already, improve it further to achieve a safer and more inclusive and more humane world with that approach. Thank you.
Thank you, George-Wilhelm. And I think more states... I hope more states listen to us and learn from Austria's experiences, and I think it's very, very important. And also thank you for highlighting the gendered impact of the use of nuclear weapons and testing. I think Rebecca also started to talk about it. I think it's a very important topic, especially when it comes to the marginalized and impacted communities and the countries where nuclear tests were conducted. So thank you for highlighting and doing this work. I'm conscious of time, so I had much more questions prepared, but I'm actually going to ask you one more question before we turn to audience, so we have more time to communicate with our distinguished audience as well. And what I really wanted to ask you is that, yes, we live in this time of insecurity in terms of, the nuclear risk reduction, the arms control, non-proliferation, et cetera, but we also seem, to mention already many times that we live in the insecure times for the inclusive leadership itself. As many of you mentioned, we have a huge pushback at the moment. It's a kind of a revived pushback, very recent one. So I guess my question is, why this is happening now? and also how can we push back even further? Maybe we need to rethink not only how we approach security, but maybe we also need to rethink how we approach inclusive leadership and promotion of women in this role, to make it more effective in this even like worse environment at the moment. And this is just a question to all of you. Can we start with Christine,
yes,
potentially, and then?
Well, what shall we do? A very difficult question. What can we change? So when you have the feeling you work like a Don Quixote for over years, fighting for women's engagement, fighting against nuclear threats and so on, but still, you mentioned the grandchildren. So where are we? Where is our mind going towards, and why don't we give up? It's just because we have a responsibility, I think, and we have to keep on fighting for a better, a secure life, and I think this is very, very, very important. What can we do, I think, to make security issues more inclusive? I think, and this certainly is not a fast issue, but a kind of mid-term strategy. I think we should invest much more in education and training. We have to invest in education and training programs focused on conflict resolution and negotiation skills. We have to, both for young people and women, we have to have and provide scholarships and fellowships. We have to have them particularly for women and underrepresented groups, because by empowering them, we educate leaders of tomorrow. So hopefully they can use that. I think this is very important. We talked about that a little bit in the morning. I said somehow we have to also get into schools and train the trainers. So we have to make teachers aware what the threats are, so that they again can teach the students. Of course, we have to get women into the different delegations. When you talk about parliamentary assemblies, the Council of Europe, for example, they have it in the statutes that there is a certain amount of women has to be in their delegations. Otherwise, I think they lose the voting right or something like that. So why not really do it on a legal basis? And then what was said also about the conferences on the humanitarian impact. I think the humanitarian impact is so important, because with that you get the civil society interested. If you talk about legal issues, it's very difficult to get into the broad society, but talking about the humanitarian impact makes people realize and aware where the threats are, and that's why it's so important to get to do this networking. As I talked about PNND, but you know, there are the mayors for peace, there are the physicians against nuclear weapons, there are women's federations working for peace and against the nuclear weapons. So we have to continue to do the work we did, maybe with more effort, and maybe, well, we just don't have to give up.
Thank you. I guess this is somewhere in between hope and despair.
Yes, exactly, yes.
Yeah. Margot?
No, I agree with Christine, of course. We have to resist. I think we have to organize ourselves. We have to do networking. We have to reach out and mobilize more young people. We are on the way out, but the new generation will have to take on. So I agree with everything that you've said. And let me just mention one thing that really stuck with me, because I've been active in an organization that's been working for women in Afghanistan for 3 years now. And we were told now that the Taliban are investing a lot, and I guess with the help of Saudis and others, in building new madrasas for, young boys. And they want to send them to these madrasas, these schools, at an even earlier age. And it means that they want to take the boys out of the homes very early as possible, and raise them in the madrasas instead. And it means that they should not be in contact with any women, including their mothers. So as early as possible, also remove them from their mothers, but also not to be in touch with their sisters. And this means that, women will be a creature that they don't know anything about. They will dehumanize also women even further. And I think that these are the type of things that happen that are very, very dangerous, extremely dangerous. And also, I don't know how to stop this. We talked a lot about it. How do we stop this? Can we reach out to the neighboring countries and those countries that probably contribute to this, and can we do more to raise awareness of these things? But these are the sort of long-term effects of such a thing. We can only guess what it means, and so I believe, and of course I'm hoping that those countries that continue to pursue a feminist foreign policy also will come together to do concrete things. They can say, we will all protect, for example, women journalists from Afghanistan or Iran, other countries where women really suffer from discrimination. We will make sure that they can tell their stories, that they can write the stories and use their own words to describe what is going on. So I think the very concrete policies to make sure that and also we cannot allow ourselves to do too much of self-censorship, because the American influence now in trying to get all of us, also the European countries, to stop using words like women or feminism or other words that they find offensive. I mean, should we accept that? We just have to come together and say, no, we are drawing a line here. And if the more countries that can come together, we can also create a kind of opposition. But at the moment, this is going on with the self-censorship in a kind of negotiation, then maybe it's not as bad as we thought. If we agree that we can change the language, we change the words. So I think we're on a slippery slope, and it will the effect will be felt on women everywhere. That's the downside, and men as well, and peace, and equality.
Thank you, Margot, especially on the changing words and changing meanings behind them. I think, over time, this problem becomes what actually, spoils the whole thing and changes the environment. So
I fear that would be the effect.
Yeah. Rebecca, what about you?
On that cheery note.
On that cheery note.
Well, look, I mean...
Well, hope, to keep hope alive.
Hope.
Yes.
You want to always good.
We have to keep hope alive.
No, but look, I would start maybe with saying that I also resist a little bit this idea that, women's involvement or civil society, multi-stakeholder involvement in issues of international peace and security, and including disarmament and arms control, is somehow a new and novel thing that's never happened before. And I mean, quite the opposite. There's so much evidence and existing frameworks that were really born out of active women's organizations and civil society organizations mobilizing and affecting political opinion. And so I think it's good to also remember those. And I mean, the TPNW is one, again. The landmines treaty that's come up a couple times is another. I mean, you had in the US, you had the Freeze movement for many, for quite a long period that had quite a significant impact domestically. So this precedent exists, right? So it's not that it's somehow new and novel that we need this diversity of voices in these processes to push forward change, but yes, there is a pushback, and so how do we deal with the pushback against the pushback? Let me maybe say three things. I mean, one is it's come up a little bit, but this idea of de-siloing communities, I think, is quite important, right? When we talk about, especially nuclear arms control disarmament issues, it's a very kind of hard security, insular community. it's looked through primarily through that lens, and you don't often get to the more human-centered dimensions, the environmental impact, health impact, etc. So you're creating kind of a silo there. And similarly, if you look at technology, I mentioned emerging technologies, AI, cyber, those issues are then often looked at more through the economic perspective, missing the security risk dimension. So you have these very fragmented communities, and the same is true for climate, and even the women, peace and security and disarmament communities, they don't come together very much and very concretely. So de-siloing that, I think, is a really, really important step, and I'm not saying that that's easy, but multi-stakeholder processes are important, and especially if we look at the new security risk environment, you have to have the private sector there, you have to have expertise from the scientific community and academia part of the conversation, because that's where the expertise lies, and you will not find sustainable good solutions if you don't go there. So de-siloing one. The other is, it's come up a lot, the human-centered approach. I do think it is an important framework and not one that is mutually exclusive of, principles of national security, quite the opposite. And so there, I think maybe, some of the quote-unquote solutions are really emphasizing cross-regional coalitions and support for these principles and approaches. And we've seen that in some fora where that's worked quite well. So it also isn't, perceived as an agenda of a particular region or a set of states, that it is a global, endeavor to pursue more inclusive solutions and policies. And I think affected communities, which has come up a lot as a very important stakeholder group in that sense, is really, really important to driving that forward. And then the last point, you mentioned it as well, Christine, education and capacity building and training. This is very close to my heart because it's one of the big pillars of the work of my office here in Vienna. And I mentioned, fellowships, including the Women's Ammunition Technical Fellowship. We have one multi-donor supported fellowship for women in cyber, where we've seen, that they're provided with negotiation skills training, with substantive training, and we've seen immediate impact on intergovernmental negotiations and processes from these types of initiatives. But also young people, youth. You mentioned children, right? Bringing these issues into classrooms, very, very important. Our office works, has a number of different youth empowerment and education programs that we support and really see that as key. And I think especially also, I'd mention maybe one plug for actually one new course, online free learning course that we launched. We just actually updated our e-learning on gender dimensions of disarmament, and so this is a free resource that's out there that's really, foundational training that can be used by different audiences. And also speaks to the women, peace and security agenda. So this is, a resource out there, but I think, with a lot of our tools, we are still in fellowships, we're still speaking to a relatively sophisticated audience. This room is a sophisticated audience. It's part of the bubble, if you will, that we all operate in, right? So how do you speak the language of those outside the bubble? How do you reach those constituencies through education and messaging? That, I think, is really the crux. I'm not saying we have the solutions to it, but I think that's really an area that requires a lot of investment, requires also looking at younger ages, working with professors and with universities, like the wonderful establishment that we're in, TikTok perhaps, and looking, and humanizing these very complicated and complex, subjects, and again, humanizing them, and also working with I think survivor communities, again, really key in that regard, to uphold lessons and legacy and tell these stories through a human lens. I think that's absolutely key to reaching, other more diverse audience. And I say that as I look at Peter as a communication expert. Hopefully he won't contradict me during the Q&A. I'll stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. And George-Wilhelm?
Yeah, just briefly, most points that I was going to raise have already been raised. Very much underline, of course, the point on the human-centric approach. Very much agree with the focus on youth. We've had fantastic experience with youth in terms of youth groups, HCOC youth group, since we just have the HCOC annual meeting, CPDO youth group, etc. There's really fantastic ways to get new perspectives in, get people interested in the field, get them to participate and contribute. There's also, of course, very important the mentorship and capacity building programs that you do, that we see CMP does here in Vienna and others that are really essential just to get new generations in, get people in with diverse backgrounds, try to draw from a broader pool of people than just the sort of standard pipelines that you go through. And of course, integrating perspectives like survivors, indigenous communities, women, civil society is really important. But there particularly, I think, a point that I do find important is codification. So not just, you know, sort of the general statements. I mean, we just did an NPT review conference where, when it actually came to transparency negotiations, we excluded those who we were supposed to be transparent to. And that's the kind of thing that I think we did quite well in the TPNW, because we really made sure that it's in the text, in the treaty, in the action plan, but also, and that was something that I suffered many sleepless hours over, in the rules of procedure, where we actually sat down and got a completely gender-neutral rules of procedure text, where we got a really strong codification of the participation for civil society, affected communities, etc. And that, I think, actually is quite powerful, because changing those kind of legal texts requires quite a high bar. And so it really sets the standard. And it's also a standard that other treaties can start to take over. And you see that from other negotiations. I mean, you always sort of reference the last agreed instrument. So the more you can do, even on this kind of technical, boring legalese kind of instruments, it really can have quite an important impact, even on the international sphere, and even when there's rollback. So maybe just that as a short contribution, because pretty much everything else that I was going to say has already been said much more eloquently than I could.
Yeah, thank you, George-Wilhelm, and I appreciate, since we're not being very disciplined with our timing. And now I would like to open the Q&A with the audience. So we have people with microphones. Please raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question. You can briefly introduce yourself, but also please be brief with your question, and also say who you asking this question. So I think here in the first row.
Thank you. My name is Rosa Loga. I'm from Women's International League for Peace and Freedom Austria. Thank you for your very interesting presentations. I wanted to remind that WILPF is the oldest women's peace organization since 1915 in many of our countries, active, and has a very excellent disarmament program, reaching critical will. I think the diplomats here also know about this work. I wanted to address two things. I think some of you have addressed it. We are very worried about what's happening in Europe, also in terms of disarmament, especially the landmine treaty. Poland, Finland, and Estonia are now discussing to quit the global landmine ban. It's a catastrophic step, and Latvia and Lithuania have already voted to leave, but could still reconsider that. So I think that's, if in the year where we celebrate women, peace, and security, I think we should really think, where have women been asked about these steps, and what about the children? Many victims of landmines are children, for instance. So I think it's really worrying that we celebrate on the one hand in a kind of empty way, and on the other hand, there's this erosion of what we have already achieved in terms of and my last concern is about the European Union, the Rearm Europe paper. Already the name of it, Rearm Europe, is going way beyond defending. It's like and also the content. I mean, if you talk about an industry that will profit our economy, it's in the paper. It says that it will profit the economy. It will create innovations. I mean, this is really very, and I thought, where have the women been? And there's also a woman commissioner, a president. I mean, why does she allow such a kind of paper to be adopted? We are shocked, I have to say.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Let's collect maybe two more and then address all of them. There is one here and then the other one there. So we're trying to be balanced. Okay. Yep, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you very much for this panel. It was really insightful opinion from all of you. I'm Elisa Kawasaki. I'm a master graduate from the University of Bologna in international security, and I also work as an intern at the United Nations here in Vienna. And so my question is, in recent times, we have experienced a political role. We have seen women in important roles, like, for example, Ursula von der Leyen, or, for example, as a national level, from Italy, we have Giorgia Meloni, and many other examples, like, let's say, at the European level, and also as other national level. So my question is, we are experiencing, as you said, like this rearming of Europe, right? And we see Ursula von der Leyen saying, we need to be ready for the war. Or, for example, Giorgia Meloni is saying, oh, we need, as a national level, more police, or we need more control, or we need to increase the GDP in military defense. So here comes my question is, those women in power are following their idea of international security, or because we are women and we need somehow to cover a certain, let's say, expectation that women are not as, let's say, quote unquote, aggressive, or let's say, let's say aggressive, like as much as the male sphere. So that therefore we need somehow to prove that we are as much as aggressive. I hope
yes.
I got my point.
I think we understand your question fully well.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we had one more question in this area, and then in the second round we'll cover that area of the room.
Well, thank you also from my side to the distinguished panelists for their insights. My colleague and I, we are currently in the national board of the Austrian branch of the European Law Students Association. And because of that, that we are students, I want to get back to the networking part. You mentioned the possibilities that should be given to the youth, but how can young women themselves contribute best to the change mentioned?
Thank you. I think let's address these questions, and then we'll do the second round with this part of the room. Any question you'd like to pick?
I'm happy to say that I agree with this. I think that it was totally crazy with the landmines, the anti-personnel landmines, and I found it appalling that these countries were willing to say that let's abandon this. It's one of the few examples we have of a very, very successful convention and ban. And luckily, my own government, which most of the time I disagree with them, but on that point they did not dare to take that step. I'm sure they were also approached, but they did not take the step to sign that letter. I wrote an article to say that I just think that you have to come to your senses, and do you really think that this is the future for Europe, that we are going to place those landmines? And since I've been working a lot on the landmine, the demining of Ukraine, I know what it means. I know what kind of scar this leaves in a country like Ukraine. But this is where we have to protest. We have to immediately be out there and raise our voices and say what we think. But the thing is also, as you have referred to, there is kind of the understanding of our time and the overall atmosphere is one of fear, because we have war going on in our neighborhood, and it is really the old saying of vinci pacem para bellum: if you want peace, you have to prepare for war. I think if you want peace, you have to prepare for peace as well. And sometimes we need weapons because there is an enemy that we can no longer talk to. But we have to do both. We have to invest as well in what comes next. When we finally have a peace, what kind of world will we live in? And how do we deal with those challenges? And it's like so one-sided now, so one-eyed, all of this, that it doesn't leave any room for those of us who talk about this. Instead, we are called naive or ignorant or whatever. We hear all of those different words being called all kinds of things. And I think we just have to resist that as well, and we have to insist, and we have to come together. And truly, I mean, I'm happy to hear what you are doing as law students, and I think you know, it's not enough to work on your smartphone. We have to meet, we have to come together, we have to live in this world that we're in now if we want a future. And we have to organize ourselves, and we have to come together, and we have to protest. There is no other way to do it now, because too much is at stake. So that would be my answer. But I totally agree with you. I understand fully what you're saying. But it's not that women need to be... Yeah, so I'm too long.
No. I think George-Wilhelm wanted to say...
Yeah, just to follow up, because I think it's a very good point. I think, and part of it is, I think, and that maybe comes back to you, Ms. Loga, is to actually start working with campaigns. There are fantastic campaigns out there. ICANN, WILPF, the campaign to ban killer robots, etc. There are fantastic campaigns out there that constantly are looking for new blood, for people to engage, to actually also inform, to work on your governments, to work on your populations, your parliaments, and so on, to inform, because there's a huge amount of misperception out there, misunderstanding, and it's making it too easy for those that want these kind of classic security solutions, nuclear weapons, landmines, what have you, to bring through agendas, because there isn't enough knowledge out there.
And I want young people to engage politically as well. We need people in politics, young blood into politics as well, because this is how decisions are being made.
Absolutely, and that's that kind of thing needs people who are educated. You know, there are even you know, in parliaments that are as forward-leaning as the Austrian parliament, there's very engaged people like yourself, but there's lots of other parliamentarians who don't know very much about nuclear weapons.
That's why I meant it's very important to engage also with organizations like ONN or PNND and so on, so that you get the information, because not all the parliamentarians, they have a lot to do, so not all of them have time for that. But when they are interested in foreign policy, in security policy, then it's important that they get information. And what I always say wherever I am, I say that we have to have more women in politics. We have to have more women in politics. We have to have youth being interested. It's very difficult also nowadays when you have the ratings, who is on the top of the list, who people trust. So it's not politics. Politics is somewhere down there. But we have to change that again, and I think it's very important that people start understanding that politics, in the end, they make the laws for the way we live, and that's why we need the young people in politics to understand that it's their life. And we have to engage young people. I know it's very difficult. It's very difficult sometimes in the parties to get in and then to move around. But somehow you manage. I've never intended to go into politics, but then, you know, you get engaged, and then you engage a little bit more here and a little bit more there, and then suddenly doors open. But it's not easy. Many doors seem to have, they were kind of shut in front of me, but then there were other doors. So somehow you have to be engaged, and you have, as I said, even if you sometimes feel like a Don Quixote, but you just don't give up, because it's so necessary, and because we have a responsibility. And yes.
Thank you. Rebecca, do you
want to just maybe to add a couple observations, and absolutely agree with what's already been said. I mean, it starts with, your own education, and you mentioned, access to fellowships, that's one thing, and not everybody has that access or can gain that access, that's one thing, but also demanding it, in your academic institutions. Why isn't there a course on this subject matter? Go to your dean, go to your head of academic studies, demand it. There are so few courses globally that deal with these issues, right? But that's the starting point, to provide the information and then allow every individual to grapple with it critically and forge their own conclusions and take it into whatever direction is right for them, whether that's campaign and civil activism, whether it's politics, whether it's just taking it back to your family or your community or your study group. That has impact and that has ripple effect, and it does exactly what I was mentioning before. It gets outside the bubble and it gets these issues into a wider set of stakeholder audiences. And I do think there's so much, we talk a lot about youth empowerment, and of course it's our responsibility, and whether it's in government or international organizations or otherwise, to provide space and frameworks and support for that. But youth are experts in and of themselves. They already have power and knowledge. And I think one thing that we see a lot is, very tokenistic engagement of youth, and also the sense that youth can only talk to youth issues. But no, youth can talk to all kinds of, substantive issues, whether it's nuclear weapons or landmines or other issues. And so I think, again, starting from demanding and acquiring that knowledge and then finding the outlets to really create a ripple effect and spread that's really, really important in my view. And maybe just to touch a little bit on, you raised this question of why aren't women leaders advocating more for disarmament and so forth. I think there isn't perhaps enough research on some of these issues as well. The role of women parliamentarians, the impact that has on defense spending and decisions. There's a lot of research out there on, sustainability of peace agreements when women are at the negotiating table, but there's less, I think, in the kind of hard security disarmament realm. So this is an area maybe for those of you who are thinking about research topics to delve more deeply into, because I do think there is some data gaps that should be explored, and to look more closely at the impact of women's leadership and engagement in disarmament and decision making around peace and security.
Maybe you can allow me to repeat my advice to students.
Sure.
Often when I meet students, I say you have to mix your selfies with doing something unselfish. You have to find a way to engage. I think that's what.
This is definitely a phrase I'm taking away today after all the events we've had. We're already quite late, but I think let's take 2 more questions from this side. And I know we cannot answer all of them, but let's take 2. So I see Ian, I think, and then the lady in the first row as well.
I know I didn't get a question, but the lady actually asked something very interesting, and nobody knows very that. About the women which are at the moment leader, that they actually not. I'm sorry. I didn't want to ask a question, but I think that her question was amazingly interesting. That actually that the women which already have leading positions are not acting, nourishing as we accept them in the area of the security, that they are trying to compete with the men which are in this area and actually are promoting bulldozer diplomacy. Yeah, so.
Thank you. Thank you for resurfacing that. We can address that in the last round.
Because the pressure, the political pressure is too high on this, on Ursula von der Leyen. The atmosphere is one of militarization, and we have to go for it. She has to act. She's representing 27 member states, and I think there's very few dare to say anything else than that this is the right way to go. Of course, they negotiate the language, but and Meloni, I think, has this as her conviction. Some have that as their conviction, but I think this is the problem now, that we all follow this atmosphere of having to invest heavily in our defense capacity, and that takes over everything else. It's very difficult to raise your voice with any other argument. That's what we see, and women, of course, are hit by that as well.
May I just?
Of course.
Worst case scenarios obviously allow nothing else than armament. So, and we all talk about worst case scenarios, be it the pandemic, be it war, be it the war in Gaza. So whatever it is, they are disasters, and the only answer seems to be armament. And this is where the vicious circle closes, because there are no women in there. There are a few women, but they are the only ones within a structure of rearmament. And you have the media and the public following that way, because there is a kind of push and nothing else can be said, as you said. So that's why we have this vicious circle, and we have to bring in women before. That's why it's so important, not have one woman here and one woman there, but we have to have a few.
Critical mass.
Yes.
Thank you. We definitely need to create structures for that to be, I guess, useful. Giulia, can I ask Ian first to ask his question, because he was first, and then you can also speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Kseniia. Mine is not a question. It's mostly a comment. Thank you for the rich discussion. I'm a little bit starstruck with the panel. And the issue of DEI is very close to my heart, so I'm actually excited that I was able to attend. As we talk about advancing women's leadership in rethinking security, I think it's important to reflect on whose voices are actually being included in this DEI and parity initiatives. There is a risk that without intentional intersectionality, we replicate the very hierarchies we aim to dismantle, amplifying already privileged voices, while sidelining women from the Global South, indigenous communities, and other marginalized backgrounds. History has shown us, from the suffragist movements up to post-colonial feminist struggles, that inclusion without equity often leaves many behind. These are powerful moments for change, but we have to be careful not to change the face of power while keeping its structure intact. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ian. Giulia, and then lady in the first row as well. But please also, let's be
Actually,
brief.
it fits very well as a continuation, because since the issue of research has been raised, and the question actually can be answered by referring to a corpus of research on how structural patriarchy works. And the issue is that the fact that some women get in position of powers is not an exception, but actually is the result of patriarchal structure. So it's not that because you are a woman, you act as a feminist also politically. And in these months, a word is circulating among cultural studies research, which is that of authoritarian feminism. So a backlash, actually, in terms of women who fight against women's rights. And I just wanted to say this, and maybe just to end this, there is a wonderful book by Bell Hooks, who is, was sadly a black feminist, and wrote a book, Feminism is for Everybody. And the book opens with a remark in which she says that the most oppressive voice in her life was the voice of her mother, because that was really like the authority for her, and was not, helping to emancipate her. Thank you.
Thank you, Giulia, for your remark. And one more, the
yes,
last one.
Thank you so much also from my side. It was very interesting. My name is Margot Wolf, and I'm a Spanish diplomat working here as deputy head of the Spanish bilateral embassy. Spain has a feminist foreign policy, and we were pushing very much for the women, peace and security agenda when we were at the Security Council 10 years ago. And we got a new resolution on Resolution 2025. So we keep on going with the role of women throughout the crisis cycle, and that's my questions will be there. So one is on prevention, and Mrs. Wallström mentioned that. So the role of women in prevention. How can we address the paradox between the necessity of having a narrative, of having media talking about that women are visible as being a prevention actor, and the fact that when a crisis is prevented, it will never take the front page of any newspaper, any news agency. So how can we address this paradox? And my second question would be on mediation, women as mediators. Mediators are a very tough job for diplomats. I think it's one of the most difficult ones. And I have had the opportunity to get to know some mediators in a training course by the UN in Norway. And they were all men, and they had all a big ego, a very big ego. So I don't know if we need women with big ego to be mediators. How do you see things there? Thank you.
Thank you. And now we revert back to the panel. Would you?
I started a network of women mediators because I heard this working for the UN. I heard it so often. There are no women mediators or negotiators. So I decided to make a list of all them. We did that already then within the UN system, so we had a list, so that argument could not be used. And as a foreign minister, I created a network of women mediators and negotiators. They were all seasoned diplomats. They had been in the diplomatic corps for a long time. They were all deployed to different post-conflict or conflict situations around the world. This new government that came after me, or the government we have now, they just ignored that network, so they are no longer active. But what it did, I think, inspired others to start to establish those networks, and I think Spain was in one as well, or has supported another network. And those names are excellent, and I think this is the way to do it. We have to start something ourselves and make sure that they are visible, because they are there, they are very knowledgeable, they are professionals, and we can just do more of those things, and that will help for sure.
Thank you, Margot. Christine, Rebecca, George-Wilhelm.
I mean, maybe just to pick up what
Sure.
Margot was just saying. I mean, indeed, I think that this really a growing, global expertise that has been built of women mediation experts. I mean, the UN has a standing, standby team of mediation experts, which has for many years now included many women. Mm-hmm. I'm sure some of them have big egos. I'm sure their male counterparts do too. I think there's plenty of such examples in history, but indeed, I mean, it speaks a little bit to what I was saying before also when we're looking at groups of governmental experts with disarmament expertise. There is a vast, array of expertise that exists, and it's really a question of challenging governments, and want to commend your government for its leadership in promoting gender equality and across the system. So really challenging governments to really identify those individuals, because they do exist. Other than that, I mean, there were a lot of comments made that more than questions, which I can only echo and absolutely would agree. For us also, again, and I think it came up a bit in our discussions, it's very, very important not to also look through too narrow of a lens, really looking at intersectional identities and factors and how they play into power dynamics in multilateral negotiations writ large is very, very key. And so, when we are looking at our different empowerment programs, we try to look at those diversity lenses from different angles. It's obviously not easy. But again, I think it's really key if we want to have that, creativity, or the necessary creativity and experience feeding into these processes. I think I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. George-Wilhelm?
Maybe just one comment, completely agree with everything said. Just on the prevention and visibility angle, I mean, there is also a visible part to prevention, you know, especially when you think of, I mean, disarmament is the area that I know best, but looking at preventing things like catastrophic consequences of nuclear weapons, looking at preventing potentially lethal autonomous weapons and their implications when we lose human control over weapons. These are things where there's very active and visible preventative work that can be done and is being done, and then also looking especially then at the feminist angles, looking at the uneven impact of radiation on women and girls, looking at the uneven impact on indigenous communities, etc. These are all looking at, for example, the problems of data in having discriminatory approaches for sensors that are used in autonomous weapon systems. All these elements have very clear feminist implications. Feminist viewpoints can come in extremely strongly and actually have this very visible and active and actually impactful preventative effect.
Thank you. Christine, anything else to add?
Yes, I just wanted to say, well, if there are organizations that only take men, not just by chance, because there are only men, for mediators, so it's also a little bit their task to find women to be there and have go to this course as well. I think this is very, very important. So, like we have those national action plans in many countries by now, and I think we have to go through them and see what could be done better. And we have to establish new action plans in countries where there are none. So I think this is a possibility of the national countries to do something for the women. And I just wanted to mention a point which seemed to be very important to me. It's important, especially in the age of social media. We have to promote equal opportunities for women in the digital area, because what we find is that it's especially women and women who are threatened in the digital world, and it's it can be politicians, it can be scientists, journalists, etc. And what happens is that they are intimidated, and then they kind of they are silenced and demoralized, and then they draw themselves back. And I think this is something we need the media to make women being seen in the work they do and where they're needed. But on the other hand, you find these threatening things in the social media especially, and I think this is something where we have to be very careful and find ways to combat that. And in the the OSCE just published a roadmap on women, peace and security commitments, and there is said promoting gender equality is not just about fairness, it's about resilience, security and building stronger societies. And I think this is a very, very good sentence, to have stronger societies, because in stronger society you have women and men and everybody have the same chance, really.
Thank you, Christine. I would like to steer this conversation, wonderful exchange, to an end, since we're already over time, but I'm very thankful for everyone to staying late here on Wednesday evening. I know it's very difficult and everyone wants to go and probably have drinks or go home. So before we all go to our day, to finish our days, I just wanted to ask you all to give like a one sentence, maybe something hopeful, on this spectrum of hope and despair. I do want to leave us, at a more hopeful note today. So maybe just one sentence to give a hope to our audiences about the topics we deliberated on today. Christine?
It's when, I've been teaching, and when I look into the eyes of the young people, they were from 15 up to 19, 20, when I saw their enthusiasm and their willingness to form the world and the way they are going to live. So I think there is much hope in the youth, really. But of course we have to lay the table for them, and then they will take the right thing, I believe in them. So.
Thank you. Margot?
No, I repeat my short poem from this morning. You know, it's a famous short poem that says, hope is that thing with feathers that perches in your soul and sings a song without the words and never stops at all.
Thank you for this.
And grandchildren, of course.
Yeah, grandchildren. Rebecca?
I can't possibly speak after that beautiful poetic. That's what we should have ended with. But no, I mean, I am actually immensely hopeful. And for the same reasons that you just mentioned, Christine, I work so much with young people and young communities in my job. And I see a thirst, a passion, a real desire to engage on these issues. And people care, young people care, and it's cross-regional. It's really from all sectors, people from, the health sector, not just nerdy political scientists like myself and many people in this room. So, I mean, there is so much desire and creativity, and so I'm immensely hopeful in that sense. But as you said, we have to really make sure that we create also avenues for ensuring that those voices are heard, and that we protect and defend our inclusive spaces and processes to ensure that that isn't lost. Thanks.
Thank you. George-Wilhelm?
Yes, very hard to follow all that, but I mean, I think there's a huge difference in terms of where the global situation right now is, but also where the opportunities are, especially for new people entering the field. I think the bar has been lowered so much because we now have access to so much more information, access, education, free programs, fellowships, and so on. So entering this field and actually then being able to have an impact has gotten a lot easier. So as long as there are people, and as we hear there are plenty, who get engaged, they have the possibility to make an impact and to sort of help course correct what's happening on the sort of more global level. And so I think that we just have to take those tools and make the most of them, and that we can.
Thank you. Thank you. And on this very wonderful and hopeful note, I think we are ready to finish today's discussion. Thank you, all of you, for coming today. Again, late time Wednesday. I'm very thankful for all of your time. And I hope that this discussion was also helpful and interesting to you, sparked some thoughts and ideas, and maybe, some of you, if you're young women, are also inspired to join the field and, drive the forces. Thank you so much for coming, for staying late, and I think our speakers deserve the round of applause. Thank you.